The scrape of Harper's chair against the hardwood cut through everything. The clink of silverware, Aunt Carol's laugh, the low hum of the television Warren always left on in the den. 25 people at that table, and when that chair moved, every one of them went quiet. I was reaching for the breadbasket when it happened. My hand stopped midair. Harper stood at the far end of the table, wine glass raised, and the smell of pine candles and roast drippings that had filled the Cole family dining room for the past hour suddenly felt too thick to breathe through. The candlelight caught her face in a way that almost looked accidental. Almost. "I wasn't going to say anything tonight," she began, and her voice already had that particular wobble in it, the one she'd been perfecting since we were children. "But I think everyone here deserves to know the truth." My hand came down to the tablecloth. The linen was stiff and cool against my fingers. 25 people. My father's side of the family, my mother's side, 3 cousins I hadn't seen since a funeral 4 years back, 2 of Warren's business partners who somehow always ended up at Christmas dinner, and Vivian, my stepmother, sitting to Warren's left with a napkin pressed to the corner of her mouth like she was blotting lipstick. Nobody looked at me. That was the first thing I noticed. Not a single face turned my way. Harper set her glass down with a careful click. "Cassie has been stealing from the family trust. $850,000. Over 3 years." She paused, and her chin dipped, and her voice dropped to something barely above a whisper. "And she's been sleeping with Brandon." Brandon, her boyfriend of 2 years. The one she'd brought to Thanksgiving, to Easter, to every family function since the spring before last. The room did not erupt. That was the second thing I noticed. There was no gasp, no scraping of chairs, no burst of voices, all talking at once. There was just a long, still moment, like a held breath that everyone had been waiting to release, and then the quiet sound of Aunt Carol setting her fork down on the edge of her plate. Not one person asked if it was true. "I am Cassie Cole. I am 27 years old, and I work as a paralegal at a firm in Asheville, and I drove 3 hours to be at this table tonight because Agnes always asks me to come. Agnes, who cannot ask me anything anymore. Agnes, who has been in the Meadowbrook Care Facility since her stroke 18 months ago, who communicates now with hand squeezes and eye movements, and who is the only person in my family I have ever trusted without reservation. I drove 3 hours for a table that had already voted before the appetizers were served. Harper." My voice came out steadier than my hands felt. "That's not true." Her eyes met mine for exactly 1 second. Something moved in them. Not guilt, not hesitation, satisfaction. The kind you feel when a thing you planned finally lands the way you planned it. "I have the bank statements," she said. "I have the transfer records. I've had them for a month." She looked away from me and back toward Warren. "I wanted to give you time to explain, Cass. I really did. But you never came to me." She had never come to me either. But that wasn't the point. The point was the 25 faces in that room, and the way not one of them shifted toward me with any trace of a question. Warren sat at the head of the table with his hands flat on either side of his plate. He is 61 years old, and he has never once in my life raised his voice at me. He has never needed to. Warren Cole communicates displeasure the way a bank communicates an overdraft. Clean, impersonal, final. He looked at me the way you look at a problem you've already solved. Vivian pressed the napkin to her eyes. "We tried," she said, to no one in particular. "We really did try with her." I opened my mouth. The words were there. I have never touched the trust. I don't even have access to the trust. I have never been alone with Brandon for more than 15 minutes at a family function. But Harper's voice came again before I could find where to begin. "She also told Brandon I was cheating on him," she said. "She sent him screenshots. Fake ones. She's been trying to break us up for over a year. That one landed differently. Not because it hurt more, but because it was so specific. Screenshots. A timeline. A year." She had thought this through to the edges. Uncle Jim cleared his throat. Cousin Paula reached for her wine. The television in the den was still on, something with a laugh track, faint and wrong through the wall. Then Warren spoke. "I think it's best if you leave tonight, Cassandra." The full name. He only uses it when the decision is already made, and he wants me to understand there will be no discussion. Cassandra. Not Cassie. The name on my birth certificate, the name my mother chose, the name this family uses like a gavel. Dad. My voice did something I didn't authorize it to do. It softened. I hated that it softened. I didn't do this. None of it. You have to let me. Please. Vivian's hand went up, palm out. Please don't make this harder than it has to be. Harper, from across the table, quiet enough that only the people nearest her could hear. You're dead to this family. She said it like a fact. Like the weather. Like something she'd looked up and confirmed before dinner. I pushed my chair back. My legs carried me to standing without me having to think about it, which was good, because thinking had stopped somewhere around the moment she said $850,000 and nobody blinked. I walked to the hallway. The family portraits lined the wall on the left. Cole family, Christmas 1989, Christmas 2003, Christmas 2011. I am in exactly 2 of them. Both times, I am at the edge of the frame. On the side table by the door, next to the ceramic dish where Warren keeps his keys, sat my grandmother's gold watch. I'd taken it off to help Vivian set the table that afternoon because the clasp was delicate and I didn't want to catch it on the linens. I picked it up, slid it into my coat pocket. The front door was heavy, the way old houses make their doors heavy. It closed behind me with a sound that was not a slam but felt like one anyway. 31 degrees. The cold came up through the soles of my shoes immediately. The driveway was full of cars. My cousin's rental, Uncle Jim's SUV, the catering van Vivian had hired, even though she always told people she cooked everything herself. My car was at the end of the row, the oldest one there, a 10-year-old Civic with a dent in the rear panel I kept meaning to fix. I sat in it for a long time without starting the engine. Through the dining room window, I could see the table. Someone had poured more wine. Harper had her head tilted back and her mouth open, laughing at something, and the candlelight was doing that same flattering thing to her face. My phone had no messages. Not one. I drove to a motel off the interstate outside Asheville. $42 cash for one night. A room that smelled of industrial cleaner and the ghost of someone's takeout. A bed with a comforter the color of old mustard. I sat on the edge of it and took the watch out of my pocket and set it on the nightstand. Agnes gave it to me on my 18th birthday. She pressed it into my hands with both of hers and said, "For Cassandra, count what matters." I turned it over. The engraving said the same thing. I had never been sure what she meant. I opened my phone. Typed, "How to prove you didn't steal money." Stared at the results without reading them because something else was pulling at me. Nobody at that table had looked surprised. Not Aunt Carol, not Uncle Jim, not Vivian, not even the cousins I hadn't seen in 4 years. They had all known. Before dinner, maybe before I'd pulled into the driveway, every person at that table had known what Harper was going to say. The only one who didn't know was me. 2 years ago, the last time Agnes could still hold a real conversation, she had squeezed my hand and looked at me with something in her face I could not name. I had thought she was tired. She had been trying to tell me something. I understood that now. She had known something was coming. I had not known how to listen. I set the watch on the nightstand. The search results waited. I started reading. I drove back to Charlotte on Christmas morning with the gold watch on my wrist and nothing else worth noting. 5 years passed. I chose forensic accounting because every dollar has a memory. A transaction does not lie the way people lie. A certification, a job at Harrington and Associates, a mid-sized fraud detection firm that had no interest in my family name. A co-worker named Diane who brought biscuits on Fridays and asked about my weekend without requiring an answer. The watch on my left wrist every day. No contact with any Cole. I kept it because I was not finished with a conversation Agnes could no longer have with me. I was 32 when Diane knocked on my office doorframe. Unknown number called twice. Didn't leave a message. Log it, I said, and went back to my current case, a physician running personal expenses through a practice account. I traced it, filed my notes, went home at 6:15. The letter was in my building mailbox. Cream envelope, clean block lettering. Return address a law firm in Asheville I had never heard of, Whitfield and Associates, probate and estate law. I stood in the lobby of my building and read it twice before I went upstairs. Someone had filed the legal challenge to Agnes Cole's will. The will currently on record had been probated 5 years ago, leaving Agnes's entire estate to Warren Cole and naming Warren as administrator of her ongoing care. But the firm had received an anonymous communication containing specific details, a witness name, a location, a phrase. I made a promise. The communication suggested a second will existed, naming a different primary beneficiary. The attorney, Ruth Whitfield, was requesting my cooperation. The name of the other beneficiary was mine. I put the letter on the kitchen table. I put the watch next to it. I looked at both of them for a while, and then I picked up the phone and dialed. Ruth Whitfield's voicemail was brisk and professional. I left my name and number and hung up, and sat there for a long time thinking about Agnes, about visiting twice a year since the expulsion, about her eyes tracking me across the room, her hand around mine. And then, without entirely meaning to, I thought about the pharmacy bag. It surfaced the way it sometimes did when I worked medical billing fraud. A prescription under a false name pulling up the Christmas Eve afternoon like a file I had not meant to open. Vivian coming in through the side door, still in her coat. The small white bag with the pharmacy's green logo, string handles, the kind of bag that meant a prescription had just been filled. She had gone straight to the master bathroom, not to the kitchen where the rest of the Christmas preparations were happening, not to the hallway to hang her coat, straight to the bathroom, bag under her arm, door closed. Just my prescription, when she came out and found me still cutting lemons at the counter. I had not thought about it in 5 years. I wrote it in the notebook beside the dream. The dream was still coming. 3 or 4 times a month, the same sequence, headlights in dark air, the crunch of gravel under tires, a sound that did not belong to any normal landscape, and then nothing. I woke from it with my hands tight on the sheets and the smell of pine trees fading before I was fully awake. I had been writing it down for 2 years. The details never changed. It felt like someone else's memory seen from a distance that made the sound and light real, but the meaning inaccessible. I wrote it in the notebook beside the dream. 2 things I don't understand. Could be nothing. Probably not nothing. Ruth Whitfield called back at 8 the next morning. Concise, unhurried, precise. A challenge had been filed. An anonymous tip with specific details. She needed to meet in person. I can be in Asheville Friday, I said. She told me to bring identification and anything in Agnes's handwriting. I thought of the watch. I did not mention it. That night, Harper called. 79 times. At 10:30, I picked it up. No voicemail for the first 63. Then her voice thinning call by call until, Cassie, please, I'm begging you. The word begging in Harper's mouth was a foreign object. I played that message twice. Something was collapsing, and she needed me inside the collapse in a way that benefited her. A probate attorney and 79 calls from Harper in the same week. Convergence was not coincidence. I went to bed. Ruth's office was on the 3rd floor of a building in downtown Asheville that smelled of heat vents and old carpeting. She was exactly what her voice had prepared me for. 60, square-shouldered, reading glasses on a plain silver chain. She looked at the watch the way professionals look at things they have decided not to comment on yet. The current will, everything to Warren. Agnes's care delegated to the Agnes Cole Family Foundation, a private entity. No mention of Cassie anywhere. Who controls the foundation? I said. We're in the process of establishing that, Ruth said, which I noted. The anonymous communication, no name, no return address, a witness name, an Asheville location. One handwritten phrase at the bottom, I made a promise. She reached into the folder and slid a page across the desk. This name appears in the communication as a potential witness to the second will, Thomas Ardmore. The name landed on the table between us, 2 words, and something happened that I could not have predicted and could not immediately explain. Not a thought. Not a memory in the usual sense of a memory, which arrives with context and narrative attached. Something more physical, a kind of sudden texture, as though a surface had appeared in my mind without warning. Gravel, pale gray, close, the sound of tires on it, pine trees, the specific cold smell of them present and clear, and the impact sound, the one from the dream, the one that was not supposed to be part of any landscape. I opened my notebook. I wrote, pale gray gravel, not mixed. Pine smell, close. Source must be nearby, trees not road. Impact before the headlights swept. I had never written that last detail. I had not known it was there. The headlights swept after the sound, not before. The sequence was sound, headlights, nothing. "Excuse me," I said. Ruth waited without pressing, which I appreciated. "A detail I needed to record," I said. "I'm sorry, you were saying." "Thomas Ardmore," she said again. "Does that name mean anything to you?" "Not yet," I said. She gave me a look over the reading glasses that suggested she was accumulating my use of that phrase with interest. And then she moved on to what she needed from me, and what the timeline would look like, and what cooperation meant legally. And I paid full attention to every word, and the notebook stayed open on my knee, with the new detail written in it, and I did not yet know why that name had done what it did. I drove to Meadowbrook Care Facility directly from Ruth's office. The facility lobby was expensive. Agnes's room was not. Industrial sheets washed to colorless. Silk flowers faded to nothing. A home shopping channel playing to no one. The visitor log, Vivian's name once a month, neat and unexamined. Harper's name nowhere. Agnes was in a wheelchair by the window. When I came around to face her, her eyes moved to me before I said her name. They did not move away. She looked smaller, but her eyes were the same, clear, tracking, completely inconsistent with the word vegetative I had seen in her medical summary. Whoever wrote that word had not looked at her eyes. "Hi, Grandma," I said. I sat down and picked up her hand. The grip, when her fingers closed around mine, was immediate and deliberate. Once, twice, 3 times. Behind me, she does that sometimes. Involuntary reflex. "Of course," I said. I stayed an hour. I told her about Ruth Whitfield, about the name Thomas Ardmore, that I was going to follow it. Her hands stayed around mine. Before I left, I requested Agnes's billing records from the administrator. The Agnes Cole Family Foundation was paying Agnes's care bills. That matched what Ruth had told me. I pulled up the foundation's public registration on my phone. Authorized signer, Harper Cole. I turned to the SSN listed on the foundation's tax identification on the attached account documentation. I had memorized my own social security number the year I started paying taxes, and had never needed to look it up again in the 14 years since. 9 digits. I could recite them as easily as my date of birth. The number on the foundation account documentation was mine. I sat in the parking lot and read the number 4 times. It was my social security number, assigned to an account I had never opened, authorized under Harper Cole's signature, established 3 weeks after the Christmas Eve dinner. Harper had opened a financial entity in my name without my knowledge. She had been running money through it for 5 years. The accusation at the dinner table had not been an improvisation. It had been the last step in a preparation that was already complete. Harper had built the paper trail first. Then she had stood up in front of 25 people and told them a story. The paper trail was already there to support. I opened my forensic analysis software. 40 minutes. The money was real, withdrawn over 31 months in irregular amounts. The initiation point was an internal account requiring Harper's authorization level. She had taken the money, built a paper version of me to carry it, and made sure 25 people heard the story before anyone looked at the numbers. My phone rang. Virginia area code. A number I did not recognize. Cassandra Cole? The voice was a man's, older, careful in the specific way of someone who has rehearsed what he is going to say, but remains uncertain how it will land. Someone who made a promise to Agnes Cole. He gave me an address, a town in the Virginia mountains. "When you come, bring the watch." "I know which one," I said. She deserved better than waiting. He hung up. I wrote the address in my notebook and started the car. The phone call from Virginia stayed with me through the drive back to Charlotte, through the evening, through a night that offered sleep in short intervals and took it back just as quickly. I lay in the dark with the address written in my notebook and the watch on the nightstand and the foundation account number in my head, running its digits like a combination I was trying to memorize before someone changed the lock. I had given Ruth Whitfield a second call from the parking lot before I left Asheville. I had not told her about the Virginia address. Not yet, not until I understood what I would find there, but I had told her about the foundation account and about the social security number, and I had listened to her silence when she processed it. "Send me whatever you pulled," she said finally, already attaching it. Another silence, shorter. "Cassandra, you understand this is no longer purely a probate matter." "I know," I said. "Then move carefully." I had been moving carefully for 5 years. The problem with careful was that it kept you contained. Containment had never been a strategy for me. It had been a strategy for them. I drove back to Charlotte with January dark coming in fast across the highway. Monday morning, the firm was already busy when I arrived. I was 40 minutes early, which was normal for me, and I had the foundation account documentation laid out on my desk and 3 preliminary analysis threads open before Diane came in with coffee and the Friday biscuits she always brought on Mondays too when there were leftovers. "You look like you worked all weekend," she said. "I did," I said. She left the biscuit on the edge of my desk without commentary. That was one of the things I valued about Diane. She understood the difference between checking in and requiring a report. I was into the second analysis thread when my boss, Martin Harrington, appeared in the doorway. The way he was standing was serious. "Can you come to my office?" His liability counsel was already there, a woman named Patricia Doyle with a thin folder on her knee. Anonymous complaint to the ethics line. Financial irregularities. $850,000 unspoken. Bank records. My name as authorizing party. I told them the documents were fabricated and I could prove it by end of week. Martin said it had the shape of interference. Patricia said the protocol required administrative leave. "The review will clear you," she said. 5 years of rebuilding, and the process required a cardboard box past Diane's desk and down through the lobby. "Procedural," I said when she looked at me. "I'll hold your chair," she said. I carried the box upstairs and set it on the kitchen table next to everything else. At 6, someone knocked. I checked the peephole. Harper. The highlights the same, the coat the same quality, but a size too large, and her hands when I opened the door were not entirely still. "Dad wants to talk to you," she said when I let her in. "The same as saying Dad wants you to stop." She sat down across the table without being offered the chair. "He says if you drop the challenge, everything stops. The complaint at your firm. The defamation motion. The psychological fitness filing. He doesn't want to fight, Cass. He just wants this to go away." "He filed a psychological fitness motion," I said, "based on an accusation he helped create." Her hands shifted. "He's trying to manage a difficult situation." I looked at her, the coat, the hands, the not meeting my eyes that was different from Christmas Eve, that had been contempt. And this was something closer to the awareness of someone who had begun to understand that the dimensions of what had been done were now visible to someone else. "I need your help," she said quieter, "with grandmother's estate, a financial situation. I just need access to one account. You're the only one who can—" "Why would I have access to any account?" Something crossed her face. "The will. If it holds up, you'd have access to everything." "I'll think about it," I said, because the thing she had revealed without meaning to, that she needed the real will to stand, was more useful than anything she had said deliberately. She left 10 minutes later. I heard the elevator doors close. I stood at my window and looked at the parking structure across the street, and I let the full shape of the day sit in the room with me. I had lost my job for the second time in 5 years. I was being sued for defamation and had a motion pending to have me declared psychologically unfit. My family's legal apparatus had been active for less than 2 weeks since the probate challenge was filed, and they had already done significant structural damage to the life I had built. I went to the kitchen table. I laid everything out. The probate letter, the foundation account records, the analysis printouts, the billing records from Meadowbrook, the notebook. I looked at all of it for a long time. Then I picked up the watch and held it in both hands, the engraving familiar under my thumb. Count what matters. I had been running my thumb over that phrase for 5 years without ever pressing on it, without ever asking whether Agnes had chosen those words for a reason that went beyond comfort. I set the watch on the table. I turned off the kitchen light and went to bed. I did not sleep. Warren had moved within 2 weeks to my job, a defamation suit, and a psychological fitness motion, all 3 simultaneously. That was not the behavior of someone who felt secure. That was the behavior of someone who felt threatened, who had believed the passive daughter would stay passive and was discovering she had not. I thought about the watch. Agnes had been meticulous. She had not given it to me because it was pretty or valuable. She had given it to me because it contained something she needed me to have, and she had been waiting, in a wheelchair she could not leave, watching a door for 5 years, for me to be ready to look. I got up at 4 in the morning. I took the watch to the kitchen lamp and ran my thumbnail along the case back below the engraving. A ridge. Slight, narrow, the kind of mark that a thumbnail missed unless pressing deliberately. At 8, I took it to the jewelry repair shop 3 blocks away. The owner handed me a loupe without question. Under his work light, along the ridge, micro-etched digits, no more than 1/4 millimeter high, 6 of them, a safety deposit box number. My hands were not steady when I put the loupe down, not from fear. Agnes had been protecting me for years before I knew I needed protecting. She had built this before anyone silenced her, and she had waited 10 years for me to find it. I drove to Asheville, not to Ruth's office. Agnes had grown up in Asheville and had kept a connection to it all her life, and First Foothills Credit Union, established 1952, member-owned, was exactly the kind of institution Agnes Cole would have chosen because it was not a bank Warren did business with. I gave the box number. The woman at the desk looked at the records and looked at my identification and said, "This account was opened 9 years ago. You are the only authorized name on access." "I know," I said. "I am ready to access it now." The box held 2 envelopes, a thick manila one, sealed, and a smaller white one with my name on the front in Agnes's handwriting. I recognized her handwriting the way I recognized the watch. Something so long part of my landscape that seeing it here, in this room, required me to sit with it before I could open anything. I opened the white one first. The letter was 4 pages, written by hand, the script slanting slightly to the right, the way Agnes's always had, in the blue ink she preferred. "My dear Cassandra," she began, "if you are reading this, I was not able to tell you what I need to tell you before something stopped me. I am writing it down so that something stopping me does not mean you go without knowing it. I want to begin with what matters most. You were never what they told you you were. You were never the difficult one or the strange one. You were the honest one. In a family that has made its peace with dishonesty, you were the only one who did not. I chose you as my heir because of that. Not because of blood, but because of what you are made of, which is something I recognize, and they do not. Your father hit a man with his car 11 years ago. The man's name is Thomas Ardmore. He was a school teacher. He was struck on a county road outside Charlotte on a November evening, and your father drove away and never reported it. Thomas Ardmore survived, but he has walked with a cane ever since. I found out because I still had access to the family accounts, and I saw the payment. I looked into it. I found Thomas. He is a good man, and he was frightened, and he had been told that if he spoke, the family would make his life very difficult. He deserved to have someone else know the truth. There is something else, and this one is harder. Do you remember the night when you were 15, on the gravel road out past the Alderton property, when you were in the car with your father coming back from the hardware store? You told me the next day that you thought you had seen something. A figure at the edge of the road, headlights, a sound you couldn't identify. You said your father told you that you had imagined it, that it had been a deer. You did not imagine it. Your father drove away before either of you could know what became of the person on that road. I have never been able to find a record connected to that specific date and location. What I can tell you is that what you saw was real, and that your father knew it was real and told you otherwise. You have been carrying a memory for 17 years that someone told you was not real. It was real. I am sorry it took me this long to tell you about Vivian. I confronted her about the accounts. She had been moving money in a way I had finally found the documentation to prove. When I told her I had already contacted my attorney, she pushed me down the back stairs. I want to be precise. She put her hand flat on my chest and pushed me backward with intention, and I fell down 11 stairs onto the landing. The doctors called it a stroke. There was a bleed on my brain, which a fall downstairs will cause, and which can look on certain imaging like a stroke if the physicians do not know to look for the pattern of a fall. They did not know to look because your father and Vivian told them I had been found at the bottom of the stairs, and no one knew how I got there. I knew how I got there. I have made a new will. A copy of it is in the manila envelope. Thomas Ardmore is named as executor. He has his own copy, sealed, with instructions to produce it if he hears from Ruth Whitfield or from you directly. Everything I have is yours. The estate. The trust account that Warren did not know, I kept separate. He knew about the family trust, but not about the account I have maintained since before I married into this family in my name only, from the money my own mother left me. It has been growing quietly for 60 years. Warren never looked for it. He assumed I had nothing of my own. That assumption is the crack in everything he built. They are planning something for you, Cassandra. I do not know the specifics. I know my son, and I know how he thinks about problems, and you have become a problem to him. Get out when you can. And if you are reading this letter, I did not get to warn you in time, and I am sorry for that more than I know how to say. But you are reading this. That means you are alive, and you are looking, and you are doing what I always knew you would do when the time came. You did not get these qualities from the Coles. You got them from me, and they have been waiting in you for exactly this moment. Finish what I could not finish. For Thomas, who kept his promise for a decade, for yourself. Because you have been owed the truth for your entire life, and you have not had it. And truth is the only thing worth the cost of going after it. You are the only honest thing this family ever made. I have never been more certain of anything. All my love, now and always. Agnes. I sat in that room for a long time after I finished reading. She had known. About Vivian, about Thomas Ardmore, about the gravel road when I was 15. The road I had told myself for 17 years had been a dream. Not a dream. A memory Warren had instructed me to discard. Grief for the years of doubting my own perception. Something close to fury at the calculation of telling a 15-year-old girl that what she saw with her own eyes was not real. And underneath both, something quieter, the recognition that I had been right. I had not been wrong or difficult. I had been the one who saw clearly, and they had spent 32 years managing that. I called Ruth Whitfield from the parking lot. I found it. The will, the original, and a letter. A silence that meant she was recalibrating. Don't move anything. I'll drive up this afternoon. Then, this changes everything, but I need the witness. I know where he is, I said. I drove to Virginia the next morning. 2 hours up into the mountains on roads that got narrower and more deliberate. I turned onto a gravel road, pale gray, pine trees close on both sides, and the smell came up through the vents, cold pine, clean and sharp. And the dream arrived in full waking clarity. Not this road, but a road identical to it. The sound of impact on a road like this would carry into the tree line and leave nothing. A small white clapboard house, a garden put to bed by someone who intended to return to it, a wind chime turning in the cold air. The man who answered the door walked with a cane, and he was older than I had constructed him in my mind, closer to 70, with gray in his beard and the particular stillness of someone who had been waiting for something and had learned over years not to exhaust themselves with anticipation. He looked at me for a moment on the doorstep, and something in his face changed. You have her eyes, he said. Agnes. Around the eyes. So I've been told, I said. He stepped back and let me in without asking me to prove anything, which meant he had been waiting long enough that he recognized what he was looking for without requiring documentation. The kitchen table had 3 things on it that he had clearly placed there in anticipation of this visit. A manila envelope that matched the one from the safety deposit box. A manila folder with medical records visible at the edge, and a bound document with a notary seal. Beside them, a teapot and 2 cups. He poured the tea before he said anything else. He set 1 cup in front of me and sat down across the table and looked at me the way you look at someone you have heard about for a long time and are only now meeting in person. She told me you'd come, he said. She said you'd have the watch and you'd understand what it meant. I just didn't know when. I've been here 11 years. Agnes found me through an attorney she trusted, drove up herself before the fall. She sat right where you're sitting and told me what she needed. She gave me the envelope and said, keep this safe until Cassandra Cole comes to you. What if I hadn't come? His hands were still on the cup. She said you would. She was very certain. A pause. Agnes was not often uncertain about the things she was certain about. I looked at his hands. The left one had a slight tremor. the kind that came with a nerve injury rather than age. His left hip, when he had stood from the door, had borne his weight unevenly, the cane taking the difference. "What happened that night?" I said. He told me. A county road outside Charlotte, 11 years ago, November, early dark. A car came from behind. Headlights and the sound of acceleration, not deceleration, and then the impact, and then he was on the ground and the car was gone. He lay in the ditch for 40 minutes, both hips fractured, nerve damage in the left leg. 8 months of recovery. He had seen the car's rear end as it pulled away, the make, the partial plate. When the Cole family attorney contacted him 3 months later with the NDA and the settlement figure, he knew the name he was signing away his right to speak about. "Why did you sign?" I said. "I was a retired school teacher with 2 surgeries still ahead of me and medical debt that was going to take my house. The settlement figure was exactly what my house was worth. I had a choice between my integrity and my roof, and I chose wrong." "You kept the promise to Agnes," I said. "That was the thing I could do right." He pushed the envelope across the table. "His sworn statement naming Warren Cole as the driver is in there. My medical records. The NDA, I kept a copy, Agnes's copy of the will, and her statement describing what she observed in the family accounts." I put my hand flat on the envelope. She said, "Tell Cassandra that I'm not giving her this because I think she needs me to fight her battles. I'm giving her this because she's already fighting them and I want her to win." I looked at the window. The garden outside, brown stalks in January cold. Somewhere in those stalks were the beginnings of whatever he had planted for spring, invisible now but present, working underground in the dark. "She's still alive," I said. "Agnes." His face changed. "I know," he said quietly. "I'd been following what I could from a distance. I didn't know if visiting would put her at risk." A pause. "How is she?" I told him about the room with the thin sheets, about the plastic flowers, about the television playing to no one, about her eyes tracking me across the room the moment I came in, about her hand closing around mine. 3 squeezes, I said. His eyes were bright. He did not look away. "She used to do that. When she said goodbye, 3 squeezes." "The nurse said involuntary reflex," I said. "The nurse doesn't know Agnes," he said. We sat with that for a moment. The wind chime outside turned slowly. The tea had gone cool in my cup and I drank it anyway. "I need you to come to Asheville," I said. "My attorney needs your testimony. The DA is going to want your statement. This is going to be formal and probably difficult." "I know," he said. "I've had 11 years to prepare." He looked at the table. I'd been waiting to stop hiding. Agnes told me I'd know when the time was right. His eyes came back to mine. "When is the time right?" I picked up the envelope. The weight of it was the weight of documentation, testimony, a decade of patience, and Agnes's blue ink on 4 pages of paper in the safety deposit box 50 miles south. The weight of what it would do when it landed in Ruth Whitfield's hands and the DA's office and the records of the probate court. "Now," I said. "The time is now." Ruth's conference room. Thomas seated, briefcase open. 3 independent verifications on the will. The forgery had 2 problems: wrong paper stock and a witness signature from a Cole Properties employee not hired until 7 years after the will's purported execution date. "They didn't think anyone would come looking," Thomas said. "It is a remarkable piece of work," Ruth said. "She was a remarkable person," I said. "The foundation account, the identity fraud." "Those are federal," Ruth said. "The DA will coordinate with the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. Is there anything I should know before that happens?" I thought about Gabriel's plates. "There may be something. Give me 2 days." Ruth noted what she was not being told. We spent 2 hours building the filing. Thomas walked through his testimony with 11 years of patience behind it. I drove back to Charlotte. Gabriel's car was on the street outside my building when I pulled into the parking structure, and I saw it before I turned in. A dark sedan sitting 1 car back from the corner in the position it had occupied twice before. Government plates. The same registration category. I had run the plate number 3 weeks ago and I had the results saved in my phone, time-stamped. And I had said nothing to Gabriel and nothing to Ruth. And I had been waiting to understand what I was dealing with before I decided what to do with what I understood. I photographed the plate as I walked past. 20 feet, shutter silent, timestamp automatic, and went upstairs. Gabriel was in the kitchen making coffee. Good day? Productive. I sat down at the counter. I met with my attorney today, and Thomas Ardmore. Something in his shoulders shifted. Not alarm, awareness. The specific adjustment of a person who has heard a name they were not prepared for. Thomas Ardmore, he said, and turned back to the coffee. I watched the back of his neck. Do you know him? No. Should I? That's an interesting answer to a yes or no question. He sat down. His eyes were steady, and what I read in them was not deception exactly, but the quality of someone carrying information they had decided not to offer. You work in finance, I said. Government side. Yes. Which agency? He was quiet for 4 seconds. In the context of a conversation that had been moving at a normal pace, 4 seconds was a long time. Cassie. Which agency, Gabriel? He put his cup down. He looked at the counter between us, and then he looked at me. I need to make a call before I answer that. I need to talk to my supervisor. Give me 2 days. I looked at him. He held the look without flinching, and there was something in his face that was not the operational composure I had been reading for the past 6 months, but something underneath it, something that had more cost to it. 2 days, I said. And then you tell me everything. Quote. He called that evening and said his supervisor had agreed to disclosure, that he would come Friday and explain everything, and that some of it he was telling me because it was right, regardless of what he had been authorized. I said fine and spent the next 2 days doing what I could do in the meantime, which was to go see Agnes. Thursday morning, Meadowbrook. Same lobby. Agnes's room, the same thin sheets, same faded silk flowers, same television playing to no one. She turned toward my footsteps before I said her name. I pulled the chair close. I read her the parts of the letter that were for her, that Thomas had been found and had kept everything she had given him, that the will was with Ruth and unassailable, that it was almost over. Agnes's eyes did not leave my face. When I stopped, her hand came up and found my wrist. 3 squeezes. I found Thomas, I said. I found the will. I'm finishing it. Her grip tightened. Deliberate. Present. The nurse appeared in the doorway and pulled the door mostly closed. I sat with Agnes for an hour. Before I left, I asked the administrator about transfer procedures. I drove back to Charlotte with Agnes's grip still present in the muscle memory of my hand. That evening I called Harper. I did not call her because I missed her. I did not call her because there was anything left between us that resembled sisterhood. I called her because I needed to know exactly how much she knew, and because I had one sentence that would tell me, and because the answer would determine something I needed to know before Friday. She answered breathless, already talking. A clerical error, the wrong SSN. She had been trying to fix it. I found grandmother's letter, Harper. Silence. 5 seconds. 8. 10. The line went dead. She had hung up because she knew what the letter contained. The 79 calls were arithmetic. I was the only variable that could solve for what she needed. I went to bed. Then I slept. He knocked, which he had not done since I had given him a key. And when I opened the door, he had a bag over his shoulder and the look of someone who had spent 3 days deciding to be honest and had arrived at the decision tired but finished. He sat at the kitchen table. I sat across from him. Neither of us reached for the coffee I had made because neither of us needed something to hold. He told me about financial crimes. 18 months building a case against coal properties, money laundering, tax fraud, insurance fraud, including the fire. He told me about Harper, about engineering, the introduction through someone who is not a mutual friend, about approaching Harper as a romantic interest to access financial records. I kept my face level. He told me about Stoddard, the 11-year payment trail, the extortion. Stoddard set the fire, I said. You already knew. I suspected. Tell me the rest. He told me about Warren stopping the payments, about why Warren had stopped them, because the plan for Christmas Eve had included burning the house and destroying the financial records, and once the house was gone, there would be nothing to expose, so there would be no need to pay for silence. Stoddard had discovered, through his own financial intelligence, that the payments had stopped. He had set the fire on his own timeline on Christmas Eve evening as retaliation after the family left for the dinner. He had not known anyone was supposed to return to the house that night. He had not known that Cassie had been expelled separately and was supposed to come back. I sat with that for a moment. The shape of it, the two separate plans occupying the same night, the blackmailer and the family working independently toward outcomes that collided before either could complete. They were not planning to burn the house, I said. No, Gabriel said. The fire was Stoddard's. What your family was planning was different. He reached into his bag and set a flash drive on the table between us. This contains the original fire marshal's report, the complete payment trail to Stoddard, and a pharmacy record. He looked at me steadily. The pharmacy record is a prescription filled on December 23rd at a Charlotte pharmacy. Sedatives, prescribed under the name S. Holland, a name with no other records attached to it. The dosage in the prescription is something our forensic pharmacologist describes as consistent with a lethal amount for a woman in the weight range of 120 to 140 pounds. I held very still. The pickup was made by a woman matching Vivian Cole's physical description, Gabriel said. The pharmacy has a security camera. The footage has been in our evidence since October. It is clear. The small white bag. The string handles. The green logo. Just my prescription. The master bathroom, door closed. December 23rd. She had put the sedatives in the master bathroom of a house I was going to return to at the end of the evening. After Harper had stood up in front of 25 people and established the story of who I was, the troubled daughter, the thief, the liar, a woman in that state returning to an empty house, finding what was waiting for her in the medicine cabinet. No fire investigator would have looked twice. The fire had come first, and the plan had died in the rubble, and I had been in a motel paying cash because I had nowhere else to go, and I was alive, and I had not known. Not for 5 years how precisely the night had been designed. They threw me out to set the scene, I said. Yes, Gabriel said. The public accusation established the narrative. The expulsion established that you were distressed, unstable, disgraced. When you came back to the house later, alone, the scene would have explained itself. Why did they think I'd come back? Because you had nowhere else to go. No money, no family, a public accusation. On Christmas Eve, in Charlotte. Agnes had said, get out when you can, and I had gotten out, and I had stayed out, alive and looking, and it had been enough. I picked up the flash drive. I held it in my hand, and then I set it down, and I looked at Gabriel. There's something else, he said. His voice had changed. The professional precision was still there, but something underneath it had shifted a quality that was closer to the personal, the careful tone of someone arriving at the part of a conversation that is being said because it is right to say it and not because it is required. When I was tracing Warren's connection to Incident C, I pulled comparative records. Same geographic area, same time period, same vehicle description, looking for a pattern. He lifted his hands. 26 years ago, Charlotte. November. A woman struck at an intersection by a driver who ran a red light and left the scene. She died at the scene. Her son was in the car. He was 8 years old. He survived with a head injury that affected his early childhood recall. I looked at Gabriel's face. He grew up not remembering the accident, Gabriel said. Not the specifics. He knew his mother had died in a car accident. He knew a driver had left the scene. He did not remember the driver. He did not remember the car. A pause. When he was assigned to investigate Cole Properties 18 months ago, he did not know he had been assigned to investigate the man who killed his mother. He had been running the case for 16 months when he found the connection in the parallel financial records. Another pause. 6 weeks ago. The kitchen was completely quiet. You were 8 years old, I said. Gabriel's jaw was tight. His hands were still flat on the table and he was looking at them. I had no conscious memory of Warren Cole. I had no memory of that intersection or that car or that evening. My mother was gone, and I knew she was gone, and the mechanism of it had been in a file somewhere for 26 years that I had never looked at because I did not know to look at it. He looked up. When I found the connection, it was in a payment record. Warren had paid a settlement to a family 12 years after Incident A delayed settlement negotiated through a third-party attorney and paid to my mother's sister, who had legal standing. It was small. It had a standard release clause. My aunt had signed it when I was 20. She told me afterward she had received some money from the driver's insurance. She did not tell me the driver's name because she had agreed not to. He stopped. She did not know I had become an FBI agent who would someday run a case against the Cole family. I thought about Agnes sitting across from Thomas Ardmore in his kitchen before her voice was taken from her, about Agnes writing her letter with the clarity and the fury and the love, documenting every incident, every thread, the pattern she had traced across 26 years of her son's choices. About Agnes writing in her letter about a young man she had met once at a historical society event who had his mother's eyes. She knew, I said. Agnes. She mentioned a young man. In the letter. Gabriel looked at me. She wrote that she had met you once. Before her fall, she said you had your mother's eyes and she knew whose son you were. I held his gaze. She knew you were connected to all of it. She didn't know you'd end up running the case. But she knew. Gabriel was quiet for a long time. She left Thomas a letter for you, I said. Inside the sealed envelope. It has your mother's name in it. Thomas will give it to you when you meet. Gabriel put his hand over his eyes. One hand, briefly, the gesture of someone who has been very controlled for a very long time and has just been given permission to be something other than controlled for a moment. Then his hand came down and his face was composed again, but it was composed differently, with something open in it that had not been open before. I looked at him across the table. Both things could be true simultaneously. One did not erase the other, even if it changed its shape permanently. You should have recused, I said. Yes. You didn't. No. He was quiet for a long moment. There's no professional justification for it. I made a personal choice over a professional obligation and put you in a position you didn't know you were in. That is what it is. I sat with that. The hearing was in 3 days. Friday, I said. Be there. I'll be there, he said. He left at 9. I stood at the window and watched his car pull away and let the whole shape of the evening settle into the room. What I had learned about the night I had survived, what I had learned about Gabriel, what I was carrying into Friday. I went to bed and did not sleep for a long time, but when I slept, I did not dream about the gravel road. The hearing was at 9 on a Friday morning in a Buncombe County courtroom. Ruth at the plaintiff's table, Thomas to her left, his cane hooked over the chair back. I sat to Ruth's right with the safety deposit box documentation and Agnes's original will in a sealed evidence sleeve. Cole Properties attorney, Pemberton, arranged his papers in the manner of someone preparing for damage limitation rather than victory. Warren arrived during Thomas's testimony and sat 4 rows back, his hands in his lap, his face arranged to communicate that nothing happening could affect him. Thomas stood and told the truth. 11 years of it, every word. He named Warren. He described the accident, the road, the car, the partial plate, the driver's face in the headlights, the NDA, the settlement figure that was exactly the worth of his house. He described Agnes driving up to Virginia before her voice was taken, sitting at his kitchen table, giving him the envelope, asking him to wait for the person she trusted to come. He described waiting 11 years. Pemberton cross-examined for 40 minutes. The answers did not change. Pemberton sat down. Ruth presented the real will, the chain of custody from the safety deposit box, Agnes's letter. The judge read it in silence, and when she finished, she set it down and asked Pemberton if his client had any response to the letter's account of the forged will's creation. Pemberton said he would need time to review the material with his client. The judge said she imagined he would. She ordered a full review of the probate record, froze the Cole family trust pending investigation, and referred the matter of the forged document to the DA's office. She suggested to Pemberton, in the tone of a suggestion that was functionally an instruction, that contact with the DA before close of business would be advisable. I gathered my papers. Warren was still in his seat, 4 rows back, and when I turned, he was looking at the front of the room with the expression of a man watching something he has been building for 30 years come apart, the thing that had always contained the mechanism of its own collapse, waiting for someone to find the thread. His hands were in his lap. They were shaking. He turned and looked at me, not the look from the Christmas Eve dinner which had been a man executing a plan he had already made. This was a man who had finally looked at the person he had underestimated and found her looking back. I held it until his eyes moved away. A reporter from the Charlotte Observer was in the gallery, her notebook open, still writing when the room cleared. The DA contacted Ruth that afternoon. The federal coordination happened by end of day. Warren was arrested on a Tuesday. His office, 2 agents, a secretary who gasped. The charges at arraignment: conspiracy to commit murder, vehicular assault, and fleeing the scene across 3 incidents spanning 26 years, financial fraud across 15 years, elder abuse, conspiracy to forge a legal document, insurance fraud. Vivian was arrested at home in the garden club outfit, the pearl earrings, the posture maintained. She asked to change clothes. They said no. The bathroom cabinet yielded the small white bag, Holland's prescription, sealed, the sedatives exactly as documented. She had kept it. Harper was arrested the following day. The assets seized, the apartment, the car, the clothes. 5 years of money moved through my stolen Social Security number. Identity fraud, financial conspiracy, wire fraud. The boyfriend who posted her bail presented FBI credentials. She called me from booking. I watched the screen. Did not answer. Stoddard was arrested at his apartment and gave up everything before his arraignment was complete. The 11-year arrangement, the extortion, the fire, his certainty. The house was empty, and the arson and extortion and racketeering charges stood regardless. Thomas and Gabriel met in the DA's conference room that afternoon. I was there. Thomas had the letter Agnes had left for Gabriel, sealed, 9 years in the safety deposit box. Gabriel sat across from him with the face of someone who had been carrying something for 6 weeks and had not yet had a place to set it down. Thomas looked at Gabriel for a long time. Agnes described you to me. She said she had met a young man once with his mother's eyes, and she knew who his mother was and who was responsible. He pushed the envelope across the table. Agnes had not known his name. It said only for the son. Gabriel did not pick it up immediately. She tried to reach your family after she found the records, Thomas said. Warren stopped her. She said that was her greatest failure. Gabriel's jaw was tight. She also said she believed you would be the one to finish it. Gabriel put the envelope in the inside pocket of his jacket and sat with his hand flat over it. Neither spoke for a long time. Then Thomas, Agnes said someone would come. I didn't know it would be you. Gabriel looked at him. I didn't know it would be me either. I picked up my bag. Go read the letter, I said. He nodded, and the 3 of us walked out into the ordinary afternoon, the work not finished, but the shape of the finish clear. And I walked to my car with Agnes's watch on my wrist and the ground solid under every step. 6 months is a long time, and not a long time, depending on what fills it. What filled those 6 months? Depositions, hearings, federal coordination, the grinding administrative work of transferring an estate from fraudulent management to legitimate ownership. Ruth ran the legal machinery. I attended everything because finishing meant being present for all of it equally, the dramatic parts and the procedural ones, the timestamps and the signature lines. Warren's sentencing was a Thursday in August. Courtroom 3. Ruth beside me, Thomas on her other side. Warren came in and sat at the defendant's table. The golf tan had faded. The cufflinks were gone. The stillness that had always communicated authority now had a different quality, a container from which the contents had been removed. I looked at Thomas, who had the expression of a man watching a debt being settled, that he had given up believing would ever be paid. The judge spoke for 14 minutes. She spoke about the pattern across 26 years, the 3 incidents as a systematic choice to protect privilege at the cost of human lives. About Agnes. About 9 years in a care facility chosen for adequacy rather than comfort. About the forged will as an attempt to erase a woman's wishes from the record of her life. 15 to 25 years, federal. Warren received it without reaction. His hands were in his lap, both of them. They were still for 4 seconds. Then a small involuntary motion in his right hand, which he pressed flat against his thigh. He turned and found me already looking at him. I held his gaze until his eyes moved away. Vivian, 10 to 15. The charges, assault causing grievous bodily harm, pushing Agnes Cole down 11 stairs with the intention of silencing her, conspiracy to commit murder, her procurement of a controlled substance under a false name at a lethal dosage, accessory to financial fraud, filing a false police report, which she had signed and submitted to the Charlotte Police Department 3 days after Christmas Eve, the lie in writing, with her name on it. She received it with the same expression she had maintained throughout every hearing. Then Ruth leaned close and told me. The Charlotte Garden Circle had voted that morning, unanimously, to remove Vivian's name from the scholarship fund she had built for 20 years. The fund continued. Her name did not. I did not feel satisfaction. Something quieter, a weight gone rather than the feeling of lifting it. Harper's sentencing was 2 days after Vivian's, a Friday afternoon. She looked different than she had at arraignment, thinner, the weight loss past the point where it read as intentional, the designer clothes replaced by something plain that did not fit the way her clothes had always fit. Identity fraud, financial conspiracy, wire fraud. 4 to 6 years. She looked at me once across the courtroom. One look, less than 2 seconds. I held it without flinching, and she looked away and did not come back. Doddard was sentenced separately in federal court 12 to 18 years. His cooperation had been documented and credited, and had not helped him enough to feel like relief. He had traded 11 years of silence for 12 to 18 years in custody, and the calculation was his to live with. Ruth's office, late September. Final signature pages, Agnes's real will upheld, the forged version struck from the record. My name cleared on every fraudulent filing, everyone documented, corrected, filed. Ruth set down her pen. How does it feel? I sat with it honestly, counting what mattered. Like finding out the ground was always there, I said. I just couldn't feel it. She extended her hand across the desk and I shook it. The facility Agnes had named in her will was a Victorian house in the mountains east of Asheville. Thomas had visited with me to prepare the room, stood in the doorway, and said quietly that Agnes had chosen well. He planted bulbs in the garden in September, daffodils and tulips and Dutch iris that would come up blue in April. I arranged her room myself. Good sheets, warm cream, the reading lamp with the amber shade, her books shelved in the order she had kept them. Agnes organized by subject and then alphabetically, and that was the order they went back. Real flowers on the windowsill, the television remote in the nightstand drawer, not on top of it, a room with warm light and a garden visible from the window, and nothing in it that was thin or plastic or chosen for adequacy. Thomas transferred Agnes on a Tuesday in November. I met them there. The facility van pulled up to the entrance, and Thomas got out first and went around to the side door. And Agnes came out in her wheelchair with a blanket across her lap and the specific quality of alertness she always had, eyes open and tracking nothing passive about her attention even now. She turned her head toward me when she heard my footsteps on the gravel. I walked beside the wheelchair up the ramp and through the front door and down the hall to the room. I pushed the chair to the window and turned it so Agnes faced the garden and crouched down so we were level. Her eyes found mine immediately. "This is the place you chose," I said. "In the will, Thomas planted the garden." Her hand came off the armrest. I took it and her fingers closed around mine. Thomas stood in the doorway and gave us the room. I told her everything that was finished. The sentencing hearings, the will upheld, my name cleared. Warren's hands shaking when the sentence was read. Vivian and the scholarship. Something moved in Agnes's face when I got to that part. A small settling, the expression of a woman who has seen what she needed to see. Thomas would read to her on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Her hand was around mine the whole time. Gabriel's letter arrived in December. 2 pages, handwritten. He wrote, "You deserve someone who chose you first. I chose the case. I chose finding out what happened to my mother. I would do it again, and I will carry the cost for the rest of my life." And then I read Agnes's letter in my car in the courthouse parking lot and sat there for an hour. She wrote about my mother. She hoped I found what I was looking for. I found it. I also found things I was not looking for, which turned out to matter more. He signed it with his name. I put it in the nightstand drawer. Maybe someday. The someday was real. Harper's letter came 3 weeks later from prison. 3 pages. Her handwriting had changed, the loops tighter, the pen pressed harder, someone learning to be precise in an environment that required it. She wrote about the Christmas Eve dinner from a position slightly adjacent to responsibility. She wrote about the money as though it had been the only available decision rather than a choice. She wrote about me, about watching me arrive at family dinners with Agnes's watch, about the way Agnes's attention moved when I came into a room, about understanding at 8 years old that what she wanted most was not available to her in the form she wanted it. She circled the truth for 2.5 pages. You were always the one grandmother loved most. I knew it since we were 8 years old. That's why I needed you gone. I set the letter down on the kitchen table. I folded it and put it in the drawer with Gabriel's letter, because they were both honest in their different ways, and honesty was worth keeping even when you did not know what to do with it yet. Some truths do not need a response. They simply need to be received. Late afternoon, a Thursday in February. Mountain roads, low light, daffodil tips through the soil in the garden lot, pale green, definite, 300 bulbs working through a whole winter toward this. Agnes was in her chair by the window. She turned when she heard my footsteps. I pulled the chair close and we looked at the garden together without my saying anything, because the room was good and the light was good and the garden was doing what it was doing. I talked to her eventually, the way I always talk to her, honestly, about ordinary things. The drive up, the coffee at the bakery in town that was worth the 40 minutes, a cardinal I'd seen on a fence post at the turn onto the facility road, improbably red against everything February, sitting there with the self-possession of a creature that has no doubts about its right to occupy the space it occupies. The book I was reading, whether the porch at the mountain house was better painted immediately or left a while longer while I decided what I wanted the house to become. Agnes listened, her eyes moving between the garden and my face. I stopped talking. The reading lamp was on against the February dusk, and the watch on my wrist caught the light and threw a small bright point on the ceiling. I reached over and picked up Agnes's hand, the cool light weight of it, the papery skin, the tendons clear under my fingers. I held it in both of mine and looked at her profile against the window, the line of her jaw, the way she held her head. She had spent 9 years in a room with thin sheets and plastic flowers watching the door because she had built the protection and sent it out into the world, waiting to find out whether it had reached the person it was built for. It had reached me. Across 9 years and a Christmas Eve dinner and a motel room and a safety deposit box and 11 stairs and a gravel road at night. I squeezed her hand, once, twice, 3 times. Agnes's hand tightened around mine, deliberate, immediate, unmistakable. Once, twice, 3 times. The room was very quiet. The daffodil tips were the first green thing in the February earth. Agnes's eyes found mine, clear and present. I was never the spare. I was the one she was saving everything for.